So this panel, like I said, is called Diversifying the Archives, a couple projects delivered through a diverse lens. My name is Zach Stein. I am the head of special collections at the Reparative Library at the University of Louisiana at Lafayette. You can all hear me, right? Cool. Okay, so I will start off by talking about a project that we started conducting and we're continuing to conduct. It's called Querying Recollection, and it deals with collecting materials related to the South and Southwest Louisiana's LGBTQ plus community. All right. So just to start off, so a couple of years ago, the American Library Association and the National Endowment for the Humanities released this grant. It was specifically called the American Rescue Plan and Humanities Grants for Libraries. Several hundred libraries across the country applied for this grant, and the University of Louisiana Lafayette was one of around 200 that received it. So the idea of this grant was out of the COVID pandemic. The idea was that libraries that were affected by this pandemic, as many of us closed, this was a chance to help us with either continuing with certain humanities projects or starting new ones. And the grant money was for $10,000. So for us, and also just talk a little bit about our archives. So University of Louisiana Lafayette, we have a special collection, which is called the Acadiana Manuscripts Collection. So these are over 700 collections that basically depict the South and Southwest Louisiana region, also known as Acadiana. And these collections range in a variety of topics, including, but not limited to, agriculture, public history, politics, Cajun Creole history and culture, the oil industry, among many others. And one of the things that we have noticed for quite a while is the idea was that we want this collection to depict all the people of the Southwest region. But one area that we thought was very lacking was on LGBTQ plus representation. So in order to rectify this, we partnered with the College of Liberal Arts' Gilbo Center for Public History. That is a research center which is based on collecting like materials, being like oral histories, digital humanities and such related to public history in that region. And also one of their main missions is to like decolonize public history. And we felt that it would be appropriate to apply for this grant in order to bolster universities' representation of the LGBTQ plus archives. So we applied, we got the grant. And so basically our plan, so we had several different ideas and plans that we wanted to use this grant money for. First off, one of our big ones was to acquire archival materials and books that reflected Louisiana, especially the Southwest LGBTQ plus community. So the idea was to find materials, archival material, be these like photographs, manuscript collections, artifacts, and we would purchase these. And the idea was to be able to share these with researchers, and also we felt that, and our other justification was that it would help with our students in public history and also our gender and sexuality studies minor. Sorry, one other thing I forgot to add, I include books here. So also part of our special collections, we have what is called a Louisiana room. And this includes many different kinds of materials aside from manuscript collections. We have maps, microfilm, vertical files, or newspaper clippings, and also we have books. And these particular books tend to be more unique, so they're non-circulating. But what they all have in common is that they relate to the state of Louisiana as a whole. And just like with the Acadian manuscripts collection, they cover a wide variety of subjects. So that was part one of our plan. The next part was to host a lecture series specifically about archiving LGBT plus materials. So the idea was to reach out to different so this included not just archives, but also like libraries and museums. And we wanted to reach out to specialists in these areas that focus specifically on LGBT plus archives. And we would have Zoom lectures to make available to the public. And then finally, another part would be collecting oral histories and having a space for that. So we want to give individuals in the community a chance to tell their stories, and then we would make them available on our websites. Okay, so one of the things that was actually recommended by one of our references was that we form an advisory board. So this included basically students, scholars, and also members of the community as a whole. And so the idea was that these individuals who were either familiar with the community with LGBTQ scholarship, that they would help guide the direction of this project. We wanted to get their ideas of what they wanted to see out of this project, what kinds of materials they wanted to see, and the kind of things to look out for. And yeah, so we met several times, and the idea was we discussed short and long-term outcomes for the project. Short-term mainly being these are the kinds of actions we're taking with regards to this grant, and then as far as long-term, what we plan to do with these items after the grant period is over. And then of course other projects we're going to do, which I will discuss a little later. Okay. And another part of this grant is we were able to get funds to hire an undergraduate research assistant. So basically the idea here is they would so this individual helped us. So when we did hire this person, this individual helped us with a wide number of tasks. So this included researching different books and materials to acquire. So and we specifically asked them to look for LGBT themed items specifically related to Louisiana and the Southwest. So for books, they looked on Amazon, and for materials they looked on eBay. And I'll talk about some of the collections in just a minute. And then as far as oral histories were concerned, we actually trained and had them conduct many of these oral histories. Me and this individual, we reached out to individuals we felt would be able to give great histories about the community. Invited them to our library and or the Gillis Center. The Gillis Center already had equipment like cameras and such to record something, and we came up with questions. We invited them, and our students actually conducted most of these histories and then transcribed them later. They did the first part of the transcription, and then I would go through and edit them. And then when we brought in these materials and collections, the student also would process them. So I showed them exactly how processing archive works. So they would do some research on the materials, come up with some biographical information, scope of contents, and showing them like how to organize and place it in folders and such. And also one of the collections that was donated and not purchased, and I'll talk about that in a second. It was a group of photographs related to one of our gay Mardi Gras crews, known as the Crew of Apollo. We got lots of photographs of that, which they wanted digitized, and so that was a project that our student conducted and had just recently finished, and now is going through and editing. And then finally, our student also created a research guide on the resources that we acquired. So one of our librarians a while back had already created like a LibGuide for LGBTQ plus resources in our library. And so our student added materials specifically related to this project to basically give students and scholars an idea of what we have and the descriptions as well. Okay, so these are some items that we collected. So the one on the left was actually donated to us. So this was part of our Acadiana Pride collection. So Acadiana Pride was founded in 2014, and it continues to this day. So we had materials like T-shirts. You see a mug over there. We also had like newspaper clippings and flyers and such. And we're actually going to be working with them this year as well to collect some oral histories. On the right, you see photographs of the crew of Arminius. So this is a Mardi Gras crew that was especially focused on the LGBT community. And these photographs date back to around 1971 and 1972. And as you can see, it's these particular photographs are mostly about like the drag balls that they had. Let's see, and then the one on the bottom, those are some of the books that we got. And these were actually, this is kind of interesting. So these books are mostly focused on like Louisiana and also the South. And they're different kinds, like some of them are about like LGBT pride. Some are about like LGBT history. A couple are like based on like New Orleans. And then there were also some that were a little darker in theme, especially on some of the bigotry and violence that occurred. And we have a couple of books, especially on one of the most deadly incidents, or one of the most deadly anti-LGBT incidents in Louisiana, the upstairs lounge fire. Something that we didn't have a whole lot of sources on. So that's been extremely valuable. And then other kinds of materials, we got several items related to an LGBT club in New Orleans called Club My that had been around since the 1930s. We got some like photographs, postcards, even some like six shooters, and also some like coins as well that came from that. So some pretty very interesting items. For the speaker series, we decided to have four. We reached out to 4 individuals. Originally, we were going to do 3, but then we thought that there was enough for 4. So, for example, the first people we had is the director of the LGBT Historical Society in San Francisco, California, and that was and again, those are like specifically related to the archive side of documenting that kind of material. Another, that bottom one, came from the executive director of the LGBT plus Archives Project of Louisiana, which is specifically about like finding archival materials and finding repositories to hold them. And then the left We had a speaker from the American LGBTQ plus museum. So obviously that was specifically related to museum related materials. And then finally at the bottom, the last speaker was related to mainly libraries. And in this instance, it was about like exploring Black LGBTQ plus studies, specifically at the Schomburg Center archive. So like each of these lectures were streamed on Zoom. Yeah, and they were also they were very well received and well populated. Okay, and then of course the other part was with oral histories. So at this point, we've conducted I think about 5 or 6 oral histories, and the idea is to have them all, and we have them on an Omeka site, which we used grant funds for, and the idea is that we're including recordings and also the transcriptions on this site. And while it's not quite ready yet, there's still some things we have to kind of work out, but it will be. The idea is to make them available on the library website. So we reached out to these individuals, had them fill out like our oral history donor form, basically allowing us to put these up on our website. And basically our goal is we want to try to get as much as diverse a sample as possible. So for example, some of the individuals we've interviewed, let's say there were a couple of men who were very active in like the 1970s, and were very knowledgeable about like the bar scene, and also were knowledgeable of like what happened in Southwest Louisiana during the AIDS crisis, and also the rise of activism. This one you see up here, this is an individual from the Southwest region, who is actually pretty well known for his advocacy about like AIDS education, and was also one of the founders of Acadiana Pride. So we got his story. We also got the story of so it's not just like individuals. We also got some histories from younger individuals as well. One individual is actually the first out trans individual to be elected to public office in Louisiana. So we got her story. And then, and just recently we also got, we also did an oral history about these 2 women who were married and who are married, and they kind of spoke about like their experiences growing up in this area. So for the most part, I would say this project, all in all, has been very successful. It's certainly a start for bolstering this representation. It hasn't been, it has not been without challenges, of course. One of the challenges was finding materials that were specific to the Acadiana region. A lot of the materials that we found were more like all Louisiana, and certainly New Orleans area. Didn't seem that there were a lot specifically related to Southwest. So simply we just kind of revised our mission statement. We just wanted to make it as we want to be as flexible as possible and be as inclusive as possible. Yeah, the second section I'll actually get to just get to last. Another slight challenge was as far as the digital space for oral histories. On the one hand, at first we were thinking about using like the university's digital space, but then that I'm not going to go into details, but that turned out to be kind of a problem due to some strange rules with regards to like how much you can spend how much money you can spend at a time. So it was kind of crazy. So we had to so we had to kind of go with it. Well, initially I think we wanted to go with this Omeka site, but this we thought would be a little easier and cheaper. But then when that fell through, we had to go back to this Omeka site, and that was like at the very end of the grant period. So that was a little bit of a challenge, but we were able to get that done. And then then I want to talk about like interruption. So as I said, for the most part, this project has been well received. There have been, I guess, there have been some detractors. Like when we would show this on like social media, especially universities, social media, there were people who would respond. There were some people who would respond negatively to some of these events. And during one of the lectures, unfortunately, we did have an incident regarding Zoom bombing, where people like came in and were just putting in these like really horrible messages in the chat. So we actually had to shut that down, and then we sent out something saying that we condemn this kind of behavior and that it won't deter us. And we ended up rescheduling. Thankfully, the lecturer was understanding. We ended up rescheduling them. So, finally, just some current and future plans. So, even though the grant period has ended, we are still continuing with this project. We were able to, thanks to funds from the Gilbo Center and also from a professorship that I have, we were able to keep our students working on this project. So they are continuing to reach out to individuals for conducting oral histories, also digitizing that Proof Apollo collection, and also looking for like materials and books that could be included. We are also continuing to reach out for like donated collections and materials. This includes like communities, and we also reach out to like student organizations on campus, including the main or one of the main LGBT organizations on there. They've already given us some materials, including like posters and flyers, especially related to their drag events. As I kind of mentioned earlier, we had that collection on Acadiana Pride, and we're planning to partner with them this year. The history department is doing a history harvest, and they asked if we would like to be involved with helping with some of these oral histories, and we said absolutely. So we're going to be involved with that. And then finally, we also been talking about like exploring new grants, like more national grants for future scholarship on Louisiana LGBT plus history. So this could include like funding for a scholar to come to Louisiana to conduct history on the LGBT community. Could be in the Southwest, but also just Louisiana in general. But the idea is to really bolster and expand this kind of scholarship. That's all I have. And before we go to the next one, all questions we're gonna take at the end. So, yeah, thank you very much. So once one gets set up. Sorry, wrong slide.
Okay, so are we good? People can see this? All right, so again, thank you everyone for being here and go to our talk on diversifying collections. My name is Joshua Youngblood. I'm the head of instruction and outreach and rare books librarian for the University of Arkansas Libraries. My talk today, I'm calling A Chance for Change, involving Ozarks, the pandemic, and diversifying collections. And I do want to make a couple of remarks right up front. This is not as deep of a case study as maybe you're expecting or the description might have implied. I am going to talk about several different projects that we're doing at the University of Arkansas Libraries, and I'm going to really bounce through several of them. I am going to get to talk about our Marshallese community outreach as well as our LGBTQ plus work that we're doing. But really, as I was putting this talk together, it became more of a reflection on our transition through COVID and how that changed our department, our division, and some work that was paused during that moment that we haven't officially restarted, and yet we're seeing the ramifications of it as we continue to evolve as a division in all the aspects of the work we do. I'll also say that my title, Instruction and Outreach and Reference Librarian, I'm going to be giving a lot of credit to other people who do really interesting work in my division. And a lot of this is not work I do, but it impacts the work that I do, working with students, working with the community. And so it's kind of a reflection of looking back on where our division is headed right now as we continue to grapple with a collecting scope of issues. And hopefully get to a point where we can finalize some of those and move into the future. So please don't read all of these words. But so this is looking at special collections, our mission and our collecting scope, such as it is right now. In 2019, we began work within our leadership team as well as in our collection development team in the division to revisit our scope and also to better align our mission with the evolving priorities and strategic priorities for the university and the libraries. So this special collection supports the research, teaching, and learning mission of the University of Arkansas. That's absolutely true. That's what we do. Now, how that actually manifests day to day, week to week, month to month, and in our own internal strategic plans, that's an ongoing discussion. And our collective scope, all those words down there, I usually summarize it for students and for donors as we collect the history and culture of the state of Arkansas, but that's really broad. It also doesn't hold us to account for certain changes geographically, culturally, and it gives us a whole lot of license to make a lot of decisions. And are those decisions kind of in keeping with what our plans were, or is it more response-based or reaction-based? That's one of the things that our leadership in our division started dealing with in 2019 and doing some work on revising. And as you all know, the world changed drastically in 2020, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So just to touch on special collections a little bit more, like all archives, particularly archives that have a broad arrangement of stuff, a broad collection of things that are in their holdings, we have complex narratives and complex collections, and they interact and overlap in lots of ways. We've been a special collection since 1971. We have more than 3,000 processed collections. I think it's probably more accuracy, more than 3,500 processed archival collections, or in 100,000 print volumes, including the Arkansas collection. We have political papers from the 1810s to literally this month. We have hundreds of research and socially thematic collections. We have family archives, municipal and county archives, organizational records, and a growing collection related to nonprofits and non-governmental organizations, which I'll touch on a little bit in a second, as well as music, art, literature, architecture, lots of different things, so lots of different narratives and stories in there. These images right here, that's a glass plate negative from the 19-teens from a boom town in the Ozarks, and those are migrant laborers working at this boom town. That's part of our story, of course. Below that corner, that's a tintype of a formerly enslaved person who migrated with the family he was associated with to the Ozarks around the turn of the century. And the lower right, that's a photograph of a class in a temporary teaching space at the Rower Japanese concentration camp. So all these come from our collections. They all represent part of what we do for the state of Arkansas. So the pandemic offered us lots of different opportunities, including like panicking. What are we going to do, right? And also deciding what we want to do. And I call this shifting priorities, finding important work to do, and some things that came out of those discussions, which were division-wide discussions where we had several different meetings, leadership team, group discussions. What are we all going to do when we're remote. We were remote for 5 to 6 months, some of us a little bit longer, and we had a gradual process that coming back in. But the projects that emerged were spurred by the moment, such as archiving COVID-19 experiences of students, and that was led by our university archivist, Amy Allen. This is where I'm going to give credit to those great people that I work with. So we reached out to classes, we did press announcements. This is our news release here about how to share your COVID-19 experience. These have been processed and are available now for researchers. I've gotten to work with classes looking back on this already, which is really interesting. We also launched a web archiving for businesses and organizations in the area that was led by our manuscripts and processing head, Katrina Winden. But all of us got to contribute suggestions, and we're looking at the experience of COVID-19 and doing some web capturing. I'll talk a little bit more about that as it relates to some of the communities we hope to serve in a little bit. But we need to brainstorm ways to use time and maintain staff morale. And that was something that we were faced with. It took us several weeks to decide what people were going to start doing besides just really do professional development opportunities. But we were doing a lot of professional development. We were attending Zoom talks, we were doing reading, and we had a lot of ideas emerge out of that. And the reason I didn't pick just one case study is because I think I talked about 8 different things, and they all emerged out of that moment. It's like, okay, what are we going to do now? And part of that was keeping our morale up. So letting staff members decide what they wanted to do, how they were going to use their time, how they were going to report back. And so which projects would end up being collaborative projects between multiple people across the divisions. So one of the things we knew that we wanted to do more, and this touches back on our collection scope, kind of like deep study we had done before the pandemic, was we wanted to find ways to confront bias and gaps in our collections. I will say though, we formally paused our collection scope revision process, but there were all these other things we ended up doing that reflected that. This screenshot here is a Zoom talk. We replaced our regular Archives Month programming in 2020 by doing a nationwide invitation for people to join us with some scholars from around the country, including a very prominent historian, African-American historian in the state of Arkansas, Dr. Sharice Jones-Branch. That's our associate dean there, Laura Burrell at the time our associate dean, that's me over there. And we had more than 300 people attend that session, and we took a lot of notes. But I think like as informative as that was, and it's great, it was really us just trying to gather ideas and have conversations without clear plans of where that was going to go. So other things that emerged out of this moment, we began launching a reparative description project. Right now we've just started phase 2, and it's so far our work's been focused on Japanese American concentration camp archives. So go back to legacy finding aids, moving that process forward. I was part of phase 1 as the outreach person. Phase 2 has a different outreach person. So that's going forward right now. We were speeding up aspects of the collection script revisiting without actually rewriting it, but it wasn't forming our work. And then some other things, like we started coordinating and speeding up our efforts at community archiving. We didn't have a formal approach to community archiving before COVID-19 made us pause and say, well, why not? And so we moved into that too. And that was led by our folk arts team, which I'll talk a little bit about now. So just before the pandemic, we received federal funding to become the home for the folk arts coordinator for the state of Arkansas. That's Virginia Siegel. She launched a program called Arkansas Folk and Traditional Arts, which we all affectionately tell everyone we know. It's called AFTA, look up AFTA, we're doing stuff. But in 2021, after months of discussion, they launched the Community Scholars Program. This is a screenshot of that page. And that was developed in coordination with an education archivist that was with us at the time. Provides training, supplies to local advocates to collect their own stories, preserve community narratives. We studied a lot of great programs like the UNC and other institutions, like, okay, what are some ideas we can do? Now, I think she's in the AFTA programs in the 4th iteration of this, reaching counties across the state. And that's not necessarily about us bringing collections in. It's also not a special collections in the normal sense approach to community archiving, but it's what we can do to move that work forward. And there might be small histories and other collections that make it to us, but that's not really the point. It's really about education. Again, fascinating. I'm not talking about that, I'm talking about other things, but as one of the things that we've been doing. So I mentioned the web capturing that we did. Did want to talk a little bit more about that and pivot to some of our specific communities that we serve. So as a community, COVID-19 allowed us some pandemic freedom. And I don't know if anyone would agree with me, but we did do some stuff we just hadn't done any of this before, and that was because we had time to spend, right? And we were seeking more immediate ways to engage our underrepresented communities, as I've mentioned. We also were taking up a more self-critical approach to our own description and collecting, our reparative description project. And we were also reprioritizing some processing projects. Some of our processing archivists were like asked, and we'll just offer these are the ones that we think we need to work on right now. Talk a little bit more about that. But you know, as people, archivists in the special collections, like everyone else in the world, we found ourselves in a historical moment. So we thought, well, how do we engage in this historical moment? So this screenshot right here is our archive instance for doing web capture. And so everyone in the division offers suggestions for community, nonprofits and the community organizations we really needed to focus on. We did a call out for people across the campus to also make suggestions. Our processing and acquisitions lead, Virginia Winden, helped steer this project forward as it went through over several months. And we got some really incredible stuff that's now available. One example I wanted to offer is that, so Marshallese Community in Northwest Arkansas. Many of you might not have heard of our Marshallese Community. It's the second largest community in North America. They've been moving to Northwest Arkansas, Marshallese people, as both refugees and immigrants since the early 1980s. We now have nearly 10,000 people in our surrounding community. That's within about a 20-mile radius of our university. And it goes without saying that they are just not as represented in our collections as everyone else in the Ozarks is. But they are definitely part of the evolving Ozarks. So while we have some other initiatives and some other collecting approaches we've done over the years, I'll mention some of those. The web archiving during COVID-19 helped us move forward in representing them. And this right here is just a sample of searching through Marshallese within the archived instance. And you'll see the Marshallese Education Initiative and all of their work, their outreach, their encouragement to get vaccinations, their food drives, all the stuff they're doing, which we were able to capture the different websites going forward. So now that's a resource. So at least that part of the work is represented in our collections, even though certainly that doesn't go far enough to building that relationship with the community, most importantly, but also in making sure that they're included in the evolving record of the culture and history of Arkansas and the Ozarks. I mentioned that we have done work with them in the past. One of our archives that we've had for a number of years is processed and available is the gaps in services to the Marshallese. They are an underserved community, both because of citizenship status or access status to government sources that's in flux, not always predictable. So we are the repository for the gaps in services Marshallese collection. We add to this regularly. This has been processed and open since 2020. So that's an archive we have already. And our university libraries does outreach in lots of different ways. We partner with educational programming. We host speakers in, we offer support, sometimes financial, sometimes other support for different programming happening. And we also make sure that we're partnering with our local museums and other groups that are doing just really great work. This image right here was part of the Shiloh Museum of Ozarks Culture when they were featured by the American Association of Museums for an outstanding education project. This is hosting traditional shipbuilders at their museum. This is not our collection, really amazing work that's happening. But one of the things we're looking at is, that intersection of empowerment and community memory, and also our university collecting focus. So where do we fit into this, and how can we be a best service for this community? One of the ways that the work we did on collection scope and collection development and what our priorities actually are, and what came about that is a very important acquisition we made. And I had 2021 to 2022, because it actually took a couple of years to get it all finalized, but we worked directly with the photographer, artist, and journalist, Lawrence Sumalong, who is a Filipino-American from Brooklyn. It's amazing work. It's featured in the Wall Street Journal, among many other places. And we reached out to Lawrence Sumalong to say, okay, how can we get your work represented? And so what he does is beginning in 2016, he was photographing the Marshallese diaspora as it shows up around the country with its focus on Springdale, Arkansas and the Ozarks. And so over the course of several months and relationship building with him, we are adding an entire collection of the original banana leaf paper prints of his work, which depict or document the Marshallese diaspora experience again. We've maintained that relationship. He joined us for a panel at Arliss last year, where he was one of our artist community members that we worked with, that we featured about how do we build that relationship. And I can say that from a teaching perspective, that collection is very popular already, but it has some restrictions involved in its access and use. We have researchers visiting, we have classes who really want to work with it, but we're being very sensitive to both the community and how we service it, but also to the artist and his needs. And so right here you see a news release after the acquisition, and that's that one image there on the upper right shows members of the community at a Marshallese Education Initiative. And then the lower right there, that's an image from the collection. This is one that he allowed to be used on Washington Post and other places, so didn't just take it. But so this shows some of the complexity in that collection that's now available and that we're proud to be a host for at the University of Arkansas. I say that that we work very closely with him and Katrina Linden, our head of processing, and others. It was a lengthy deed of gift agreement. It was lots of discussion, and there are some rules that restrict its use. So you can see this use note here: collection materials are available for educational and research purposes. It can't be used for commercial purposes at all. Duplication is very limited. It's also extremely fragile, and so we took a long time to get it ready, preservation-wise, to be able to service in our reading room. But we're proud that we do have it. It's represented in our finding aid. We've been able to brag about it and put out the news releases, and also, importantly for me, students and other researchers who are working with it. So I'm going to transition now, not to smooth this transition at all, but I do want to talk about another community that we've been working with in the Ozarks that, for me, anyway, represents this long story of an evolving Ozarks, evolving history and culture, and some successes we had at working with it to document their story, and ongoing work that still has to happen. So the Ozarks are home to historically six different LGBTQ, specifically lesbian separatist communes. And they have a long story. It's a complex story. It's been told in some scholarly studies. There's a lot of documentation left to do. One thing that we've done very successfully, we have a years-long project working through Reveal Digital to digitize newsletters and other journals that were produced by that community during the 1970s, 1980s, actually up through the 1990s. That's available open source. Please go look at it. JSTOR. Go look at Reveal Digital. The hard labor journal and its entirety is there. It's featured in many classes that we do. It's also very convenient that we had that ready when COVID-19 hit, because it became something featured in our synchronous and asynchronous instruction. We're able to say, hey, this is something we have. Let's work with it. It's invaluable, in my opinion, and I do donor relations as well, but it's invaluable in showing our commitment to preserving history and working with what we have already and finding ways to leverage the stuff we have, but then have that ongoing conversation for how we can help document in the way that's most appropriate for the community. It's a complex relationship, working with this community, partly because of institutional mistrust, partly because of the history at the University of Arkansas, appropriation, mistreatment in the area, of course, but me and other people in our division have done what we can to continue building on learning ourselves, but also finding ways to continue to document and make the history accessible. So this picture right here, another picture I can't take credit for. This appeared in a local Arkansas magazine a few years ago. This depicts Diana Rivers, who's the leader of this community, still in the home that she built by hand in the 1980s. As she was founding the Ozark Land Holding Association in Madison County. If you know anything about the Ozarks, we don't get deeper in the Ozarks than Madison County. This community is still going, even though Diana Rivers is near the end of her life. And others have reached out to special collections in part to help document her story and other stories. We haven't been as successful yet in whichever way it ends up manifesting. But some things we've done to get this integral story included in the larger complex story of the Ozarks. This article, among many others, I've put in vertical files. We maintain a research file collection. Continue working with networks in other contexts, which is yielded a few periodical collections, AV material collections, some other things. I'll show those in our library catalog in just a second. And then to continue to build related collections, including back to landers. We have a growing collection of back to landers and bioregionalism. That's the movement of separatist people of all sorts to the Ozarks in the 1970s, 1980s. We're growing that collection, as well as working with others, women's political power networks and the LGBTQ community writ large and other organizations. So I mentioned some of our donations of kind of related materials. I know you all love looking at library catalog records, especially from the OPAC, but I like these screenshots here because it shows the Indigo Girls as part of the Arkansas collection. So why would we have the Indigo Girls in the Arkansas collection? It doesn't really make a lot of sense. Except this was part of a really interesting and important collection of media collected by Marilyn Yoder for more than 20 years. She donated this to us. It was just phase one, and us eventually getting more of her article collection and related article collections. You can see there that she has a local subject heading, the Marilyn Yoder collection. It includes romance novels, music, LGBTQ, sexual guides, and explicit material and pornography, which we've included in the Arkansas collection as well. And we have gotten some aspects of our article collection already, and there's some accretions coming in. She keeps giving us stuff, and we'll keep at it, and she's not ready for it to be released yet. But we're hopeful that we'll get to the point of making her collection available as well. And it's just one of several different collections that we continue to get because of a slow process of building relationships with the community. I mentioned earlier, processing priorities. One of the things we did is we pivoted to, and there are processors from my shop in the room, so if I'm wrong, please do correct me. But my memory says that we asked people to work on projects that they felt was really important, and also to have an open conversation about what the priorities should be. One of those archives that was processed during the pandemic release was opened in 2021 was the Ralph Hyman papers. This archive is particularly important if you're going to do organizational development and political activism research on LGBTQ+ in Northwest Arkansas in the last 30 years. Since it's been open, we've had at least 2 Arkansas Historical Association papers use this, multiple graduate students, people just immediately knew the importance of this collection. And it was one of our processors who prioritized this. We had it for years. And then he said, okay, this is Dr. Todd Lewis said, it's time for us to go and release the Hyman papers. And it's sure enough, he was right. It's been used heavily. As I'm going to show kind of how I fit into this. Well, I'm the education and outreach and rare books person. I do talk to a lot of people in the community, and part of being in outreach is that there's lots of different ways for me to have conversations. And what you're looking at, this picture, is a box that I managed to get to us during the height of the pandemic. It began with a chat from Facebook Messenger with someone who I commented through my church, commented through some couple of networks. She and her wife are immunocompromised, but they wanted to make sure that I got this box of material that relates to Diana Rivers and others. It included their collection of hard labor, but also clippings from Grapevine and an alternative press newsletter, and then other pieces of ephemera and event publications, including for the organization Snapdragon Theater, that we did not have at all in our collection. And so through a series of like Facebook messages and text and what were we going to do, she ended up doing a drop off at the Unitarian Church. Then I came and I got it and I brought it back. And so now it's into our cataloging queue for special collections. So not all the stuff was original to us. Not all of it was unavailable to researchers. Some of it was, some of it did augment what we had. but it showed kind of like a flexibility in relationship, but also just continuing the work, building the relationship with community in some ways that it will end up surprising us going forward. I do want to mention some ongoing challenges. I didn't talk about this at the beginning. Of course, we had the pandemic and we all had that challenge. We are also about a third of the way through a complete renovation project in our special collections. Our associate dean has left us, so we're about to do a hiring. So we have a leadership vacuum on our special collections. We've been through 4 deans in the last 6 years. So our new dean is working out great. This is being reported and he's awesome. But I'll say that we've had some leadership challenges. So the reason that that collecting scope work hadn't been done was partly we had to pause because we didn't know who was going to sign off on it. Partly we were just too busy. And partly we didn't have all the answers yet. So we have to get back on it in earnest with a new leadership in our division, with our new dean and say, okay, so where are we going to go forward? And I look forward to being part of the conversation to say, this is all the stuff we've done. We have some really great stuff we've been doing. It's a little unfocused. It's not really maybe targeted as a strategic priority necessarily, but how can we take this and go forward? And among other things we've done in the past year was we moved the entirety of the materials that were in our main branch library Mullins off-site to our Links facility. Had to completely reset our reading room and all of our access points for a temporary space. One of my colleagues who is giving a poster tomorrow, she was part of that workflow of getting thousands and thousands of boxes and the entirety of our print collections to offsite storage over the course of 5 months, asserting much better intellectual control actually during the process than what we had before. And then getting to the point where we can service all these records, including the Lawrence Sumalong photograph collection, including our new acquisitions related to the LGBTQ community. So we are gonna maybe get some solidity, solidify some of the stuff that's going on. This is an image of my teaching collection that's in our temporary space and what we're able to do right now. But the diversifying the collections as a coding will definitely remain. That's all I have. Yeah,
All right, good afternoon, everyone. Let me just get this started. All right, so my name is Eric Milakevich, and I'm the University Archivist at California State University San Bernardino, or for short, CSUSB. Today, I'm going to be talking about a project that I've been working on to better document Black history and culture in the inland region of Southern California. More specifically, the area east of Los Angeles that includes most of San Bernardino and Riverside counties that we locally refer to as the Inland Empire. This community-based collaborative initiative is focused on capturing the accounts, experiences, and personal narratives of members from the Black community so that this history can be represented in our regional historical record. The Inland Empire region of Southern California, centered around the cities of San Bernardino and Riverside, covers more than 27,000 square miles and is home to a diverse population of more than 4.5 million people. Situated just 60 miles from Los Angeles, this area has a rich history, but it's often overlooked and at times even consumed by the larger metropolis to the west. This gap in coverage widens when it comes to the history of its BIPOC communities, who have played an integral role in building and shaping the Inland Empire, but have remained largely absent from its historical record. The history of the Black community in particular has been largely ignored and often excluded from the histories written on Southern California's inland cities. Longtime Inland Empire residents and community activists, Wilmer Amina Carter, a former California State Assembly member representing Rialto, California, and her husband, Retibu Jaycox, a local business owner, decided to take action and rewrite this long-established, incomplete narrative of our region by capturing the history of their community. In 2007, they launched the first oral history project in the area focused on capturing the accounts, experiences, and history of the Inland Empire's Black community that they referred to as the bridges that carried us over. Along with a small group of volunteers, they met with Black pioneers and leaders from throughout the region who contributed significantly to its development, conducting and recording more than 100 oral history interviews with community members over the span of nearly a decade. This small grassroots effort documented both the struggles and triumphs of the Black community throughout the years, highlighting histories that had long been silenced in San Bernardino and neighboring cities. However, shortly after Retibo's untimely death in 2015, the project halted, and the recorded interviews remained hidden from public view for several years without any mechanism in place to make them publicly accessible. In 2020, faculty and students from 3 of the area's leading universities, so here at CSUSB, the University of Redlands, and also the University of California, Riverside, came together with Mrs. Carter and key residents from the Inland Empire's Black community to revitalize the project. This group has transformed the project into a much larger community-based collaborative initiative branded as the Bridges That Carried Us Over project, documenting Black history in the Inland Empire. In addition to conducting oral history interviews, the project has also expanded its scope to include work focused on identifying and preserving community-held historical collections and in developing a community-centered participatory digital archive of primary source materials documenting Black history in the region. Recognizing the need for additional community-based support to accommodate this broader scope, the Refresh project focused early efforts on strengthening existing and establishing new ties within the community. So in 2021, we held 2 open community forums that provided local educators, historians, activists, and other allies an opportunity to engage in conversations centered on the current goals and future directions of the project. These forums were instrumental in garnering additional community interest and support, helping to generate a network of community partners and co-sponsors that include local outreach foundations, faith-based organizations, media outlets, and cultural heritage repositories. These supporters provide guidance, assistance, and resources for the project that help to increase its visibility in the community and also sustain our efforts as we move forward. This bolstered support network also made it possible for faculty and students from CSUSB, Redlands, and Riverside to focus their energies on addressing one of the major limitations of the original project, and that was its inability to transcribe, process, and provide access to the oral histories that they had captured. So during the 2021-2022 academic year, faculty from the 3 universities incorporated this work into 6 undergraduate courses in both history and ethnic studies. Students were assigned to not only transcribe the original interviews, but also to analyze the content discussed in each by logging key topics, events, and organizations that were discussed in the interviews. They also tracked spatial and temporal coverage, so documenting the locations of notable neighborhoods, residences, businesses, and other venues in the community, along with the time periods that were covered. This transcription and analysis work completed by the students helps to expose the content on these interviews and is instrumental in improving the discoverability and accessibility of these histories as we begin to move them into an online environment with the digital archive. So the video recordings that were transcribed, analyzed, and processed by the students were used in part to see the Bridges That Carried Us Over digital archive, a community-centered participatory digital archive hosted by the CSUSB libraries in a university-supported bpress Digital Commons instance. Currently, we have around 40 oral history interviews that are now publicly available for the first time ever. And this is a resource that will also continue to grow as faculty and students continue to conduct interviews in the community. Over 25 additional oral history interviews have been completed during the past 2 years. Many of these have been recorded remotely using Zoom video conferencing due to the COVID-19 pandemic, like the one shown on the slide of Mrs. Green Jordan here with her virtual background in place. A more structured approach to the interviews, combined with the use of Zoom, has aided in the transcription of these new interviews. We've actually been able to generate fairly complete auto transcriptions from Zoom that allows us to more effectively and efficiently process these new recordings for online access. But we still do have about 75 plus interviews from that initial effort that still need to be transcribed. And a little later on, I'm going to discuss our plan for how we plan on completing those. To complement the oral histories, like I said, we've also started digitizing personal and family historical collections so that digital versions of these materials can be hosted alongside the oral histories in the digital archive. Over 1,000 historical photographs documenting Black families, businesses, neighborhoods, and celebrations have already been digitized, and we recently started to integrate some of these into the digital archive with geotagged locations when possible to provide a visual representation of the areas and communities represented, like the image you can see on the slide from Colton, California. I also want to mention a really important component of this work that shouldn't be overlooked, and that is in securing permissions. So to ensure that we're carrying this work out in an ethical manner, we've been granted permission by the interview participants and content owners to provide public access to all materials that we make available in the digital archive. For those materials where we haven't secured permissions, they're still maintained as part of the archive, but we will not make them publicly accessible online until we have the permissions to do so. So with a dedicated support community in place, efforts to capture and process new and existing materials underway, and a digital asset management system now available to preserve and provide access to the gathered content, we've started to direct our attention to other areas of work. The first of these has been on outreach and advocacy so that we can begin to highlight and amplify the history of the Black community in the Inland Empire, bringing it into greater public view. Programming centered around the project was incorporated into Black History Month celebrations in both 2022 and 2023. And we've done this primarily in the form of community story share and scanning days, aimed at capturing brief video vignettes and digitally preserving historical materials at various venues across the Black community. The first of these was held at the Moses Schaefer Community Center in Paris, California, in conjunction with the celebration for Mrs. Willie Moses' 100th birthday. Mrs. Moses is a longtime civil rights and community activist who has served the Paris, California community since 1957. This was a great opportunity to not only celebrate Mrs. Moses and her accomplishments, but also a great outlet to meet with community members where they live and help preserve their history in their community. A community scanning day was also held this past February at the 10th annual Pioneer Breakfast, which was held on the CSUSB campus here. And that celebrates Black excellence and honors individuals that have left an indelible mark on the respective communities within and outside of our university. Additionally, faculty involved in the project have given numerous presentations to promote awareness on the project, and have also used resources from the digital archive and from these community-held collections to further expose the Inland Empire's Black history by delivering talks in our area on the history of the Redlands Black community and on the early San Bernardino Black Civil Rights Network. All of these efforts combined have led to an increased media interest in our project, with outlets such as NBC News for Los Angeles, PBS, the IE Voice, San Bernardino Sun newspaper, and SoCal Voices podcast, all featuring stories on the project that forefront Black history in the Inland Empire. We've also established a web presence for the project designed to better connect the public to this history. A webpage was designed and is hosted by the CSUSB libraries to both document the project and also direct users to relevant resources on Black history in the Inland Empire. Faculty and students have completed several online ArcGIS story maps featuring topics such as color lines and school segregation in San Bernardino and the Redlands, California Black community in 1910. Again, all of these things work to surface history that up until now hasn't been visible to a broader public audience. Our students have also launched an Instagram social media campaign combining visual imagery and historical research that highlights the Black community. Spotlight posts on Instagram, like the one on the slide for Alberta Kearney, the founder of the Dora Nelson African American Art and History Museum in Paris, California, are released a few times per week to educate the public on the contributions of Black activists, leaders, and organizations who enacted change in the Inland Empire. With the assistance of our library media staff here at CSUSB, I was actually even able to create a brief promotional video for the project using clips from the oral history interviews and also digitized photographs from the community. The video features a rare original reel-to-reel recording of the song Joy, performed by the Mutonics, a San Bernardino-based all-Black gospel group from the 1960s that was actually discovered in the community and digitized as part of our project efforts. So let's take a look at that now.
Well, I can tell the world about this. I can tell the nation, but I'm so telling what my Jesus and my Lord has telling that to comfort us, and it brought joy, great joy unto my soul. Well, my Lord, he done just what he said. Yes, he did. Yes, he did. Well, he healed the sick and he made.
I mean, the contributions that African Americans have made in this area, and so we just all over the world. But we decided that we grew up here. This is our home, and we wanted to talk about the contributions that were made here. The world's been done, the United States been done, all that's been done. But what about the Inland Empire? These people have done so much, and they've served so many people, and we wanted to talk about that, and we wanted to archive that. because he had no way of knowing he would be gone.
Yeah.
I don't know when I'm going to go.
No.
But people need to know who came before them and who paved the way. These young people need to know that.
Yes.
Joy, joy, he brought joy, 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 he brought joy, 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 he brought joy, well, he brought joy.
But San Bernardino was an excellent place at the time.
Yes.
A few people like me had businesses. And since I was a southern boy from an area where we had everything of our own, I felt San Bernardino belonged to me.
Unto my soul, joy, joy, well, 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 he brought joy unto my soul.
Well, it was just, my mother was a person that was active in community, and it was so obvious. And the Martin Luther King, that got me started. I went into LA to see him at the First AME Church and came back, and we got started with that. And we had lots of marches. And I had all my children, 2 in the stroller, 2 hanging onto the sides of the stroller, and my oldest son. And this woman said, "Why are you out here with all these little children?" I said, "Well, I want them to know that their parents were in the struggle."
Well, I can tell the world about this. I can tell the nation that I'm so telling what my Jesus and my Lord has done, and that the comfort Lord has comfort us come. He brought joy, great joy unto my soul. Well, my Lord, he done.
All right, so other more recent efforts have included acquiring physical archival collections. I want to note, though, that this project is not a collecting initiative. So the acquisition of collections is merely a byproduct of the other work that is being completed, and we're not actively pursuing collections to acquire. If historical materials and collections can be maintained in the community, then that's where we prefer that they stay. However, there have been a few instances where community members reached out because this cannot be done. Typically, this is due to aging collection caretakers and a fear that these materials would be lost when they pass. So the CSUSB Libraries has agreed to steward collections like this and has already integrated a few into its special collections in the University Archives Department, including the personal collection of Wilmer Amina Carter. This is an extensive collection of around 130 linear feet compiled over a 30-year period by Mrs. Carter, documenting both her personal and professional life, along with that of the Inland Empire's Black community. It includes documentation of community organizations such as the National Council of Negro Women, the Inland Empire chapter, the West Side Action Group, and the Inland Area Kwanzaa Group. We also have the photographs of John Coleman, a local photographer that documented the Inland Empire's Black community for 3 decades between 1990 and 2020. And this contains thousands of print and digital photographs of local events, organizations, and people. Lastly, the records of the West Side Action Group, a community activist organization founded in 1972 to support and advocate for the Black community in San Bernardino. And this includes correspondence, meeting agendas and minutes, photographs, and other materials detailing the group's efforts in the community. And these are also available in the CSUSB Library Special Collections. Processing of these collections is already underway, and the CSUSB Libraries is committed to supporting additional collections as the need arises, so that they can also be preserved and accessible for the generations to come. Looking ahead, we do have some immediate next steps and a few others that are a little more aspirational at this point. So we've started exploring external funding sources to support various project goals. The first being funds to support oral history interview transcription. As we all know, transcription can be a long and tedious process. So initially, to assist the students, we did experiment with several automated transcription tools such as Trent and Otter AI, but they were unable to produce accurate and reliable transcriptions of these interviews due to the nature of the recordings. So poor audio quality, multiple interviewees, numerous interruptions, et cetera. And while students were able to transcribe a fair number of interviews over the course of the year, this approach just wasn't sustainable for the remaining recordings. To help expedite this process, I pursued an archival grant from the John Randolph Haynes and Dora Haynes Foundation, which is a leading supporter of social science research for Los Angeles and the surrounding region. In February, I did receive word that the proposal was funded to outsource the transcription to a human transcription service And in September, we'll begin a year-long project to complete the remaining 75+ interviews. So the vendor will complete the transcription piece, and students will be hired to do the interview analysis and processing work so that all of these recordings can be added to the digital archive. We're also currently looking into a grant opportunity funded by the California Arts Council to form an artist collective based out of the Inland Empire that uses the project's oral history interviews and also the other historical materials that we've gathered to create visual performances, poetry, and artwork that highlights the lives of the interviewees and the themes covered in the interviews. A little bit further down the line, we hope to connect our project's Black history materials with collections from other BIPOC communities in the region to promote an even more inclusive narrative. We also would like to develop K-12 curriculum using these historical resources aggregated from the BIPOC communities to bring greater historical representation into the local schools so that students can better understand the diverse history of our region. So that's our project, where we're currently at and where we're headed. Thank you. And I guess now we can probably open it up for questions.
So all of your projects have a digital component. What is your plan to sustain that?
That is a good question. So, as far as, so there's a couple different aspects here. So as far as like our digital like photographs are concerned, like right now we do have we're keeping them on like we do have a digital space right now that is funded by the library. At some point we will once the collection is ready, we'll want to put it up on some like a digital asset management system, like for example, the Louisiana Digital Library. We also would like to maybe put like digital exhibits and such on our website. But yeah, for the time being, it's going to be kept like on our basically on our shared drive digital space, and we'll make it available for for people who want to see them. We make it available like in our reading room, the whole collection. And as far as oral histories, the Omega space that we have right now, for now we have it funded for a certain number of years. So that's gonna kind of help us there in the short term. And then eventually those will probably have to also go up on our on our digital space once that's finished.
Eric, do you want to go next?
Go for it.
Okay, well, I have a short answer. So of the things that I shared today, the one with the clearest digital component is our work with Reveal Digital. Of course, there is kind of redundant preservation happening there, both the JSTOR through the Reveal Digital nonprofit, but also we have our Archivimatica instance. So whenever we produce things for collaborative projects, we are preserving it in Archivimatica as well. And so that's also true of our work with archive.org and Archive It. So we have redundant preservation through Archivimatica for that work as well.
And here at CSU,
go ahead, please.
I was going to say here at CSUSB, the library and university both support the digital asset management system we use, which is currently the bPress's Digital Commons. We also do have server space available on campus that's replicated to have backup copies of all of the digital oral histories and photographs that we are digitizing. So yeah, campus support moving forward shouldn't be a problem for us here.
Yeah, and one more just note on some of our stuff, which I didn't talk about today, but we have multiple grant funded projects where digitizations with multiple partners, and just one, I guess I did reference it, it's our Japanese American concentration camps projects. We've been part of the JAX federal funding in the National Park Service funding for 10 years now. And so there's digitization that happens in-house. All of the digital archive is hosted by CAST, which is a digital center at the University of Arkansas. They have their own storage solutions, but then we use we have a content DM instance as well for our digital services. So it's actually duplicate work that's happening. So everything that's scanned that is uploaded into the shared platform is also, there's backup copies in-house.
I think you all may have mentioned about community collecting projects, like going out and asking folks to bring in materials that you may digitize and then keep the digital contents for yourselves. How do you negotiate when people bring things that are out of scope to those collecting projects and kind of say like, yeah, that's not really what we're looking for? It's always a really delicate issue, you know, when I've had those issues. I'm just wondering if the three of you might provide some insight on how to negotiate that.
I think I might have the shortest, least interesting answer here. So we don't do it.
Yeah.
But a slightly longer answer is the one that I mentioned, our community scholars program. That's in the field training other people to do their own scanning. And there have been times when we support acquiring equipment that's really working with other local partners. So for instance, if we're in Stone County, Arkansas, we're working with the community group there, we'll work with the Stone County Public Libraries in order to have digitization there or help someone acquire their own flatbed scanner. And so we're just literally not doing it. Again, another one of the grant projects I'm involved with involves the university grants related to the Buffalo National River, in digitizing 50 years. We've had opportunities from different people in the community where they're bringing us stuff and like, okay, so now can we scan it so we can take it back? And that's where the conversation I've been having is, that's not really what this project is. But if there's any other way I can help you, including consultation, me going out there with you. One opportunity relates to county records that have been located that were unknown before we started our. And so we have people from the Arkansas State Archives here. And so making those conversations a little bit more fluid between our institutions is one of the things we really want to do and not have a discounting view of that for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, as far as, I mean, we do have a lot of donors who come in, they give us, there's like particular material that they'll want like digitized and they say, but say they still want to keep the physicals, they're not ready to give those up or something like that. Yeah, if it's within scope and the experiences I've had, they have been in scope, we will digitize, we'll keep the digital copies and then give the physicals back. But yeah, if it is out of scope, we do have a de-accession form that specify it. Actually, it's in our regular donor form. We do have a section regarding disposition. It says if for whatever reason we don't keep these particular items, we would either return to donor, discard, or something else. We give them the option. And if we find there's something that's either out of scope or there's duplicates, whatever, we put those aside. We let them know these are materials that don't belong to collection. We have a de-accession form that gets signed by like me, my supervisor, our dean, and we discard the way that the donor form states. But yeah, I mean, as far as like out of scope, we try to look at what, because oftentimes like when donors will give us material, like I feel like they are related in like one way or another, but yeah, we do make sure that if it has like absolutely nothing to do with our mission, that it doesn't, that we want to let them know that the kinds of stuff that we do include and what we don't include.
Yeah, and this has come up a little bit at our community scanning day events. I mean, those are very targeted. So, we're asking people to bring materials related to, the Black communities in our area, but sometimes people will bring other things with them, right? So we have, trained staff and students and myself, we sit with and we talk with the potential donors. We look through the materials with them and kind of explain, what it is that we're looking for to add to the digital archive. So historical photographs, yes. A Time magazine that has, an article in it about Martin Luther King, probably not, right? So just having that conversation with them, letting them know what we do and we don't add, and then we just wind up scanning those items that have relevance for the archive.
I have a question, Rebecca. Okay, unless someone I certainly don't want to jump the queue. So one of our projects related to AFTA, that's our Arkansas Folk and Traditional Arts, that launched a couple years ago, was a Dragon Ball history project. I didn't mention that. I don't want to get into the details, but it has drawn attention in the state of Arkansas. And there are a host of different examples of regulatory state shifts right now. And so are there legal concerns or any plans that you have, or have you had to have a public or official, have to deal with public or official reactions to that aspect?
Not yet. Well, as far as the oral histories, like they haven't, even though we've made the website, there's still some things we have to iron out, so they haven't been released yet, so they haven't. But yeah, so far we have not experienced that kind of pushback. Having said that, considering that this is going to be an election year in Louisiana, and there are some bills that have been going on, not necessarily. Well, there's certainly at least one bill that was targeting tenure for a professor. And there was another that was targeting public libraries, specifically related to specifically attacking like LGBT books, calling them like sexually explicit and stuff. So those are certainly concerning, and our faculty senate has been keeping an eye on those. Our faculty senate, also our University of Louisiana system. So we're definitely keeping an eye on those. But yeah, at this point, we haven't run into that yet.
A question. At your institutions where you have programs doing community archiving work, and you're able to have funding to, for example, purchase scanners to leave out in the community for people to use, did you have any pushback along the way from your institutions on funding such things?
To be honest, I can't really speak to that in detail. So I know that we have provided some standards, but I don't know the details of it. And there is federal funding involved, and there's also special collections funds that we have made available at times. So that's really led by Virginia Siegel and her team with APTA, and I just don't know the details well enough. I can't say that I haven't heard any pushback for the times when it's happened, but it's not routine at this point, and that is aspirational though. And so I've been in some planning sessions. I'm one of the steering committee people for our NEA grants, and we've had some aspirational planning to say we really want some pocket scanners and flatbeds to be part of a packet that is just left in the community. So that's evolving, and I wish I had more specifics for you, but I can follow up.
Okay, thank you.
Here's one question from Matthew Peakton. This is a chat question. How does your institution manage? Wow, this was there. How does your institution manage the expenditure of time for community history projects when you may or may not be able to maintain content at your facilities? Has there been administrative pushback on this for the sake of having work accomplished? Jacob? I guess it's about community history projects when there's still work with strained budgets and such.
Well, I don't know. I mean, personally, I consider, like, as far as these particular projects are concerned, I consider them to be like part of our main jobs. I mean, as archivists, like part of our job descriptions are reaching out to communities and soliciting collections that we feel are appropriate for the archives, and for my personal view, and certainly others as well. Try to get collections that show like the diversity of the community. So personally, I feel that's I mean, yeah, we can get overwhelmed, and we do have multiple projects going on, but personally, I still feel that these kinds of community projects, they define like what our archives are all about, and I think they're just as important as the other projects that we're doing.
Eric, do you have an answer, or would you like me to?
Sure, yeah, I can jump in. Yeah, luckily my institution, both at the university and in the library have been super supportive of the type of work that I've been doing in the community. So I really haven't gotten any pushback. And aside to that, at the Cal State system, librarians and archivists, some of us are lucky enough to have faculty status so that we get to pursue our own research interests. So even if there were pushback here, that would be part of my, the research agenda of me pursuing tenure. So I would be able to continue on with this work. And like, Zach said, I mean, I see this as instrumental to what I do as an archivist, and it translates into, acquiring collections and providing services to the community that I see as a function of the library and the archives. So luckily I've had full support here, but I understand there are places where that might not be the case.
So I could say that I'm not aware of institutional pushback. If anything, it's been the opposite. It's been institutional support. And, my talk was really about how we don't have a concerted strategy built around these things. But I think there's an implied strategy that if we have multiple people working on projects and we have an interdisciplinary and solid approach to these things, people are going to find the time and the resources to do that. And that is how it's played out. But it's easy for me to say that there's not no pushback, because again, I'm a tenured librarian and I would not have heard it probably if there were. I did allude to, and I don't want to get too many specifics about, there has been some questions from Little Rock that have made it to Fayetteville related to some of our initiatives, and there were staff that were involved in those questions. And so that is not something that impacted me as a faculty member, other than we've had special collections answer questions that if you were asked me, I would say don't even need to be asked, and yet they were being directed at our staff.
I was curious, leading from that conversation or the question about the piece about digitizing content that the community is going to keep. Do you feel like your institutions have really robust digital preservation to help with the fact that you are getting just the digital versions of those materials? Or do you feel like it's still kind of, I know at least, it's a lot of institutions that still look like a very much growing need, and people are finally, grappling with digital preservation, but because you're getting these materials completely digitally, do you feel like that was something you had to solve, or something that was already kind of set in place when you were doing this?
I guess I'll start. When I came to this university, we didn't have much of a digital program, so kind of had to start it from the ground up. It's certainly getting there, and at this moment, what we're concerned about is, yes, certainly the preservation aspect, and our campus IT does help out with that a little bit. But yeah, at the same time, we certainly do need to do more there, the preservation, and we're going to be, me and our digital archivist, we're going to be developing plans for that. But yeah, it's definitely something that is in factor at the time.
Yeah, our digital preservation program has been evolving kind of parallel to a lot of the things that I mentioned earlier. Although two of the people that I name dropped from my institution, Amy Allen and Kate, really the both part of our digital preservation team, among other things, got our informatica systems in place. And I can say very briefly that although there wasn't explicit administrative support for those initiatives a few years ago, there has been in the last few years, including shifting some of that funding from special collections budgets to library-wide budgets and some other things that looks pretty solid.
Yeah, I mean, I think digital preservation is always a concern. Not very many places, kind of have a wrangle on that. Here, like I said, we have a digital asset management system, but if we were to lose funding for it, I think we'd be in a world of hurt. So at this point, what we're really doing is trying to make sure all of our formats are open, our metadata is open, so that we can move from system to system, and just that we're keeping lots of copies of all of it in different places.
That's it. I think we're out of time. All right.
I'm happy about that.
Eric, you want to finish that? I think you may have.
No, I got to that. I'm good.
There we go.
Okay. All right. Well, yeah. Thank you very much, everybody.